I was hauling farm equipment into rural Kentucky. For me, it's a regular route that I know like the back of my hand. I drove all day under Kentucky's scorching May heat. Finally, as the sun set, I was able to enjoy the sweet cool of the night. As time turned from evening to morning, the traffic on the roads began to subside and clear, calm roads opened up in front of me. I was in my happy place, walking with perfect timing and feeling a rush of energy from my tires treading the pavement. It was the perfect time of day. That was until I went over a steep rise and saw two colors that every trucker and motorist hates: the flashing orange of construction signs and the red lights of traffic signals all along the road. Nothing makes my blood boil more than standing in traffic, especially in my big car. I started grumbling until I saw a small side road on my right, shining like God's beacon. Most people wouldn't want to drive on an unfamiliar road, but I'm not like most people. If you have a sense of direction and logic, side roads are just a small detour. I turned onto a lonely road, waving slightly to the passing traffic. The road was narrow, but thankfully deserted. Not many people travel these roads at 1 o'clock in the morning. The road led through a forest, and I slowed down. Nothing spoils the experience of a run like an out-of-control road digging into the grill. It was dark in the woods, but the darkness was no match for my headlights, which cut through it like a blade. I concentrated on driving, but allowed myself the occasional glance around. I didn't often get to drive through the woods at night, and I wasn't about to neglect the beauty of nature. The forest seemed quiet, and I don't mean sound, just dead. I've ridden enough at night to know where to watch for nocturnal creatures, but there were none here. There were no birds in the trees, no foxes snooping between the bushes, not even squirrels watching from afar. I reached a fork in the road, and using my knowledge of the highway system, I realized that I needed to turn right to get past the construction site and get to my destination. I turned right and continued down the wooded gravel road. I drove for several minutes straight, not noticing anything but trees. No other roadsides, no village houses, not even power lines. After about an hour of driving, I noticed a gnarled tree to my left. The tree looked centuries old, with rotten bark and branches that looked like long clawed fingers reaching for me. Despite the heat, I felt a chill run down my spine. I continued walking down the road for another 20 minutes when something strange happened. I know it's impossible, but that same tree with the clawed fingers was to my left again. I know trees can be similar to each other, but this was too unique to be anything else. I shook my head furiously, trying to shake every impossible thought out of it. I convinced myself it was just a coincidence until I saw the same tree again, but this time on the right. The wind was moving the branches, making those huge claws shake, and it felt like they were trying to grab me. I didn't care about safety and squeezed the gas pedal almost to the floor. I whizzed past the tree, and thankfully it never came back. Time passed like sand through an hourglass, and I still didn't encounter a single turn or civilization. The silence began to irritate me, and I turned on the radio looking for someone to talk to. There was nothing but static on the radio, which shouldn't have been possible since I have one of the best satellite radios on the market. I kept listening to the interference, for it was a distraction from the strange sensation that came over me. Perhaps the radio was a good luck charm, as I finally reached another fork in the road. I estimated the distance and tried to determine from the brightness of the sky whether there were any towns or highways ahead, but to my horror, there was only darkness. I decided to turn left and hope that my instincts would pay off. Before I had traveled a mile, another turn appeared in front of me, and this time I turned right. This time, it was half a mile before another sharp turn appeared. I continued to the right and immediately encountered yet another curve. My truck barely had enough room to turn left. I don't know who designed these roads, but I wish I could punch them with all 18 tires. I found myself on another impossibly large stretch of road and started to get worried. I should have been on some highway by now. I quickly switched radio stations, but still nothing but static. Even though I was used to the isolation of trucking, I felt alone and desperately wanted contact with the outside world. A bright light to my left may have answered my prayers. Through the trees on another deserted road, a truck as large as mine was visible. I almost cried with relief. I increased my speed and began honking the trucker's antique SOS signal. I waited for a response from the trucker, but there was none. I repeated my signal, but my shout went unanswered. There is not a trucker in the world who would not respond to that signal. Through the darkness and trees, it was hard to see the cab of the truck. Suddenly, another truck picked up reckless speed and sped past. I glanced at the license plate, hoping I could warn other drivers that someone was violating our unwritten code. It was hard to make out at his speed, but what I saw almost made my heart stop. The last 4 digits were identical to mine. I shook my head, trying to comprehend what was happening. There are millions of license plates in the world, and some of them had to have similar numbers. On another big car that also happened to be unidentified, said a voice inside my head. I decided to ignore the voice and looked for signs of where the truck might have gone, but all traces of it and the road it was traveling on were gone. I began to feel extremely uncomfortable and begged for a familiar highway. Even stop-and-go traffic was better than this. The radio continued to make noise, but every now and then I could have sworn I heard voices. I turned up the volume, and for a moment I thought I heard 2 words that shouldn't come out of a radio: jingle bells. Who the hell is playing Jingle Bells in May? None of it made sense, and I convinced myself I was dreaming it all. But then I saw it. Outside the left window, I could see a swamp with piles of snow. It was absolutely impossible. Even under the canopy of trees, there was no way snow could be preserved in this Kentucky heat of May. And yet it shone in the moonlight, as fresh as a cup of morning coffee. I began to slow my step. I had to see if what I was seeing was real. I stopped and was already reaching for the knob when suddenly a large shadow swept past my door. I was completely stunned and my blood ran cold. I looked around for whatever had created the shadow, but there was nothing around. Whatever had created it was gone, and it wasn't the only thing that was gone. The snow was completely gone, as if it never existed. I started punching myself in the face to feel the prick that told me I was awake. I started the car again and hit the road. I was lost like I had never been before. I looked up at the sky to see if I could find my landmarks by the stars, but the sky was completely covered in clouds. Wasn't the moon shining just a few minutes ago? My inner voice asked. I was so confused and was starting to get scared. The thick and unnatural fog began to obscure my view and increase my discomfort. I finally reached my limit and had to do something I had never done in my life. I turned on the truck's pre-installed GPS. I felt like my father was turning over in his coffin, but I didn't care. I wanted to get back to the main road, and I wanted to do it immediately. The computer turned on and started searching for my location, but what it found only increased my anxiety. I had completely disappeared from the map, and there was only a black field spread out in front of me. Stupid technology was broken. So much for the wave of the future. I drove on, hoping to catch a signal, but nothing was working. There were occasional voices on the radio, but I couldn't pick up only the odd whisper. Outside, the fog grew thicker and thicker, almost blocking my view. I squinted, and I could have sworn there were figures moving in its mass. The GPS beeped, nearly giving me a heart attack. I glanced at it hopefully, but the screen said I was somewhere in Western Europe. I ignored it and kept going as fast as I could. The stupid machine kept changing locations. Melbourne, Indiana, Nebraska, Udny. None of it made the slightest bit of sense. The whispers on the radio got louder and louder, driving me crazy. Finally, when I couldn't take it anymore, the fog in front of me cleared a little, the road came to a dead stop, and trees with sharp branches grew in front of me. I hit the brakes as hard as I could, and by the grace of God, the truck stopped before I hit the trees. The fog began to billow around me as if caressing my truck. Through the trees, the fog began to dissipate little by little, and a figure appeared in the distance in the light of my headlights. I should have been relieved, however, there was something wrong about the silhouette in front of me. Despite the fact that I was shining the brightest headlights on it, the creature looked like a figure hidden in the shadows, as if it was reflecting the light itself. I couldn't tear myself away from contemplating its ghostly form, and then it began to move toward me. The creature did not walk like a man, but almost glided like a ghost through the fog. The whispering in the radio receiver intensified. Loud and clear, I heard my name whispered in some eerie voice. Tears rushed from my eyes, and I squeezed shut. This isn't real. Please, God, let it not be real. I gripped the steering wheel with all my might, begging to get back home, back on the road. I felt a dark presence surrounding my truck and heard a light scratching at the window. I heard my name being whispered again, but not over the radio, but right outside. Pugliese. I shouted into the sky and opened my eyes. I found myself at a bend in the highway on a well-paved road. Looking around, I found that the forest, the fog, and that horrible entity were gone. The radio started up again, and Charlie Daniels' voice came on the air. Asleep at the wheel. In 23 years of truck driving, I had never once found myself asleep at the wheel. I didn't even remember feeling tired. I looked to my right and saw the familiar golden arches waiting for me, and I had never pulled into a parking lot so quickly. I parked the car and took a few deep breaths. I was home, and I had never felt so relieved. I glanced at the GPS and thought for a moment that the stupid thing had broken again. The screen showed that I was only 5 miles from the drop-off point, even though I wasn't supposed to get there until noon at the earliest. There was no way I could have traveled that distance in just a couple hours. I ran into a restaurant, hoping the black coffee and salty fries would clear my mind. I don't know how long I sat there trying unsuccessfully to make sense of this horrible night. Finally, I went to the restroom to splash cold water on my face. When I got to the sink, I saw something that made me drop the rest of my coffee on the floor. Standing in the mirror was a man I didn't recognize, at least not completely. In the mirror was me, but not as I had last seen myself. My hair, which had a few grains of salt in it, was now completely gray. There were wrinkles on my smooth skin and liver spots on my hands. Somehow in those couple hours I had aged at least 15 years. I would have sworn I was dreaming if I hadn't felt the burning sensation of hot coffee on my leg. I've turned in my load and am now sitting in the parking lot for the first time, dreading my return home. My sanctuary has become a prison, and I fear I can't take any more of these long trips. A future awaits me in which I have no idea what to do with my life. I still don't know what I encountered last night, but in the back of my mind I realize it was real. I leave this as a warning to all drivers who dare to drive through the dark backroads of the world. Please, for the sake of all you hold dear, stay on the road.